Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tangmen based on novel. So let's start. Juzi was now executing that plan, and had already completed the first step in her proposal. Everything was proceeding according to her strategy. This time, the Sun Moon Empire's mobilized army was smaller than the Star Luo Empire had imagined. They only had 200,000 soldiers. However, they were all the sharpest and most elite soldiers. 6 of the Sun Moon Empire's 10 great Soul Engineer legions were participating in this war, and 3 of them belonged to the hand that protects the nation, the Fire Phoenix, the Evil Tyrant, and the Terraclaw Soul Engineer legions. The Evil Tyrant Legion and the Terraclaw Legion were responsible for attacking the Star Luo Empire. Juzi deeply lamented the fact that they couldn't kill the White Tiger Duke, who was rescued by someone from a hopeless situation. If the White Tiger Duke was dead, Juzi believed that her plan would have been 100% successful. The Star Luo Empire's western forces would be sent into disarray without the White Tiger Duke in command, and would be messy and chaotic for a long period of time. She could then execute and complete her strategy casually. She was surprised that the White Tiger Duke wasn't killed, but she still stuck to her plan, relying on their formidable surveillance. The Sun Moon Empire's control over the borders was simply too strong. They were watching every single move the Star Luo Empire was making. Just as Huo Yuhao had guessed, Juzi was waiting for the best opportunity. The Star Sky Doluo, Yi Yulin was among those inside the tent. This tent wasn't at the Star Luo Empire's borders. Instead, it was located not far from the Heavenly Soul Empire's borders. After the Star Sky Doluo missed his chance to kill the White Tiger Duke Dai Hao, he immediately brought his 2 Soul Engineer legions back within the Sun Moon Empire's borders and rendezvoused with Juzi as fast as he possibly could. Only the handful of powerful individuals inside this tent truly knew Juzi's battle strategy and plans. The Evil Tyrant Legion's commander, Wang Yiheng, lowered his voice and asked, "Marshal, are we going to continue waiting?" Juzi lowered her voice and said, "We can't wait any longer, and the time is almost right. One of our high-altitude aerial surveillance tools has been discovered, and that is quite ominous. I'm afraid that problems may arise if we continue waiting. The Doling Empire's reinforcements for the Star Luo Empire are in position there, and our plan is starting to take shape. We don't need to seek perfection, so we can make a move on our side. Master Yi, may I trouble you to inform the Holy Ghost Church so that they can cooperate with us? We will make a move at daybreak tomorrow. Generals, go back and get ready. We have to do everything in one breath this time. We have to break through all the way to Heaven Do City." Yes. These generals and powerful individuals were more than a little unconvinced of Juzi in the beginning, but they had done everything according to her plan, easily destroying the Star Luo Empire's border defenses, and almost killing the White Tiger Duke. They were now starting to be convinced, especially by Juzi's baffling style of deploying and mobilizing their soldiers. Many times, these generals were still confused, when they had already achieved the goals of their battle strategies. The intel that they had received from the front lines confirmed that the Star Luo Empire was being pulled along in the way that they wanted, and even the White Tiger Duke, who was a reputable marshal across the entire continent, didn't discover their plan. Juzi placed a lot of emphasis on surveillance. This time, she had deployed almost every single surveillance soul tool in the Empire, and even mobilized the aerial surveillance soul tools that the Empire's cities used for defense. Her reasoning was simple: if they used these surveillance soul tools at the borders, why would their cities need those surveillance soul tools for defense, as long as their borders weren't broken through? Juzi got to her feet. Lights flickered in her beautiful eyes. Xu Qianran wasn't very mobile, and because of his status, she was practically battling on Xu Qianran's behalf. He trusted her more than anyone else. Her revenge had begun, and even though the Heavenly Soul Empire wasn't the Star Luo Empire, destroying the Heavenly Soul Empire was a prelude to decimating the Star Luo Empire. War is about to break out on all fronts. Where is that fellow? What is he doing? I hope I don't meet him on the battlefield. Huo Yuhao quietly returned to Imperial Radiant City, and went back to the room that he shared with Dai Luoli. Obviously, Dai Luoli wouldn't be coming back for quite some time. Huo Yuhao had sent him off to the city that the White Tiger Duke was stationed in before he discreetly returned to his room. He had exhorted Dai Luoli again and again, before they separated, to not reveal anything about him. "Why are you standing there, princess?" Huo Yuhao saw Xu Yun standing next to the window once he came in. Xu Yun turned around and glared at him. Do you two still have the awareness that personal guards should have? Where did the two of you go for the entire night? Huo Yuhao shook his head exasperatedly as he stared at Xu Yun's indignant expression. Xu Yun was different from Dai Luoli. She was part of the Star Luo Empire's royal family, and she couldn't know about the things that Dai Luoli knew. Dai Luoli has disappeared. I was looking for him in the city just now, but I didn't find him even after searching for a long time. I was just about to find you and ask you where he'd gone. He's disappeared. Xu Yun was momentarily stunned as she heard Huo Yuhao's words. When did he disappear? Huo Yuhao answered, he disappeared not long after dinner. I don't know where he's disappeared to. He said nothing as he left in the cover of the night, and he hasn't come back since then. Xu Yun frowned tightly and said, the city's gates have been sealed. Where could he possibly be? Let's go, we'll go search for him again. She turned and walked out as she spoke, and Huo Yuhao could only follow her. They searched the city for a while, but how could they possibly find any trace of Dai Luoli? Eventually, a whistle that signaled an emergency assembly rang out. The sun was about to peek out over the horizon, and Xu Yun immediately shivered coldly when she heard this whistle. She blurted, is the enemy here? Huo Yuhao lowered his voice and said, calm down, don't be worried. Let's gather our people first and await orders. All right. The astonished look on Xu Yun's face faded away at Huo Yuhao's reminder, but she was still breathing heavily. After all, this little princess hadn't participated in a war before. She couldn't help but feel her heart beat faster when she thought that the Sun Moon Empire's army might have crossed over to her side. Every soldier stationed in the city swiftly assembled, and every officer that was ranked battalion commander or higher was summoned for a conference. Huo Yuhao followed Xu Yun to the military headquarters. Xu Yun went in for the meeting, and he waited outside. He didn't even need spiritual detection to eavesdrop on this meeting for him to imagine that this emergency meeting had nothing to do with the Sun Moon Empire invading them. The Sun Moon Empire didn't even have soldiers at the Star Luo Empire's borders, so how could they launch an invasion? This meeting probably happened because the news that he had instructed Dai Luoli to pass on to the White Tiger Duke was taking effect. Xu Yun came out after a few moments, and her expression was clearly a lot more relaxed than before. We're not being invaded, she told Huo Yuhao softly. Oh? Then what was the meeting about? Huo Yuhao asked obligingly. Xu Yun was very excited. The White Tiger Duke has come up with a plan. We're preparing a counterattack on the Mingo mountain range, and we will attack as soon as possible. This time, our reserve troops will also participate, and we will be responsible for providing support. Recruits will be all the way at the back, so no harm should come to them, and we will treat this as a training exercise. But no matter what, the recruits are still going to an actual battlefield. Come, let's hurry back. They are counterattacking at the Mingo mountain range. Huo Yuhao was momentarily stunned when he heard the news, but he understood immediately afterwards. The White Tiger Duke, he lives up to his name as one of the most reputable marshals of his generation. It seemed the White Tiger Duke had believed the intel that Dai Luoli conveyed to him. At a time like this, the Star Luo Empire couldn't support and reinforce the Heavenly Soul Empire in time, even if they wanted to. Furthermore, that could only happen on the basis that Dai Luoli's conjecture was true. With the White Tiger's Duke intelligence, his decision should be a probing attack, so that he could observe and find out how the Sun Moon Empire was deploying its armies by attacking the borders. If the situation was what Dai Luoli had said, then the Star Luo Empire's best choice would be to use their full strength to take back control over the Mingo mountain range. Afterwards, they would invade past the Sun Moon Empire's borders, putting pressure on the Sun Moon Empire, so that they wouldn't dare use their full strength against the Heavenly Soul Empire. This decision was far better than reinforcing the Heavenly Soul Empire directly. The Douling Empire's reinforcements should be used directly against the Mingo mountain range. They were only several hundred kilometers away, and were much further from their destination if they were to travel towards the Heavenly Soul Empire. They were too far away to save the Heavenly Soul Empire, so the best choice was to attack the invaders and draw their forces away from the Heavenly Soul Empire. Hopefully this decision will be effective, Huo Yuhao sighed to himself. At the same time, he asked himself, if I were the marshal, what would I have done? Could I have been like the White Tiger Duke, and made such an immediate and decisive choice? He definitely would have made the same choice, but Huo Yuhao knew that he wouldn't have been as decisive as the White Tiger Duke. Huo Yuhao was more confident in dealing with the Sun Moon Empire, because nobody could do better than him at targeting and destroying the Sun Moon Empire's surveillance Sol tools. The Star Luo Empire's reserve troops were mobilized, but the situation should be like Xu Yun had said. They were to treat this like a training exercise. The White Tiger Duke was probably leading his most elite troops into battle in a situation like this, but he still hadn't forgotten to train his soldiers. At the very least, he intended the urgency of this war to temper his soldiers, so that he could better control the entire situation. Imperial Radiant City's 4 gates quickly opened wide. The armies would be a lot quicker if they exited from all 4 gates at the same time, while their lines and progress would be staggered if they all had to leave through the same gate. Huo Yuhao and the other recruits were furthest away from the battlefield, so they were naturally placed behind everyone else. Battalion Commander Huo Yuhao followed Xu Yun out of the city, and called out to her from beside the horse she was riding. Yes? Xu Yun glanced at him. Xu Yun had always had her doubts about Huo Yuhao, but because she had absolute faith in Dai Luoli, in addition to the fact that Huo Yuhao might be from the White Tiger Duke's mansion, she had forced herself to accept him. Furthermore, Huo Yuhao had given her reminders at crucial moments in several instances. She didn't even realize it, but she was subconsciously starting to rely on this Tang Dong. I want to take a look at the situation in front, and then I will bring back first-hand news for you. How's that? Huo Yuhao whispered. You want to go to the front lines? Xu Yun exclaimed softly. Huo Yuhao tilted his head slightly. Xu Yun was hesitant. That's too dangerous, no. Huo Yuhao chortled and said, how dangerous can that be? I'm just going to take a look from far away. Furthermore, you've forgotten that I'm also a soul master. Don't worry, I'll come back to find you very quickly. Xu Yun thought for a moment, then said, all right, you can go. But be careful, that's weird. I wonder where Dai Luoli is. He's been gone for a long time. Huo Yuhao said, he mentioned the Duke before this. Could he have gone to find the Duke? Maybe he couldn't stand the loneliness here anymore. Xu Yun was momentarily stunned. And he didn't bring you along? Huo Yuhao forced a laugh and replied, maybe he's afraid of my beatings. Xu Yun's face became a little strange. But he seems to be improving very quickly recently. Huo Yuhao looked up, and a mischievous grin appeared at the corner of his mouth. Why, do you want to try? No. Xu Yun exclaimed almost instantaneously. There was no need to mention being beaten like Dai Luoli was. Her stomach still throbbed painfully when she remembered Huo Yuhao punching her in her abdomen. Huo Yuhao shrugged. He sounded a little disappointed as he said, if you are willing to participate, I believe he will work even harder. I'm going to leave now, and if he comes back, make sure he doesn't go anywhere. He began to walk faster as he spoke, and ran off to one side before swiftly disappearing into the darkness. Xu Yun's other personal guards were following behind her, and were confused about what he was doing, but Xu Yun said nothing, so naturally none of them dared to ask. Huo Yuhao used imitation to merge into the night sky, and flew towards the Mingo mountain range. He thought to himself as he flew, I haven't been back for long, and now I'm going back, what a hassle. I wonder what the White Tiger Duke will achieve with this counterattack. Huo Yuhao stretched his spiritual detection out like a web in all directions as he rose into the sky, and quickly discovered the large armies of the White Tiger Duke moving forward on the ground. The Star Luo Empire had brought out their full strength, however, he could only see legions formed by normal soldiers at this moment. According to what Xu Yun told him, 8 of the Star Luo Empire's 10 great Soul Master legions had reached their western borders under Princess Jiuzhou's command. Huo Yuhao thought to himself, they should be all the way in front of everyone else, because normal soldiers will only be massacred if they go up against soul tools. But can the Star Luo Empire's Soul Masters break through the Sun Moon Empire's defenses? Huo Yuhao was still thinking to himself when a place in the Mingo mountain range ahead suddenly glowed, and large patches of light flickered again and again. The battle has already begun. Huo Yuhao contemplated calmly for a moment before picking up his pace once more. He didn't fly directly towards where the battle was happening, instead taking slight detour, and proceeding towards the edge of the battlefield. Huo Yuhao wasn't sure how much strength both sides had invested in a battle as intense as this. He would probably be treated as an enemy by both forces if he ventured forward brashly and was discovered. The flashes became increasingly clear as he drew closer. Furthermore, most of those flashes were flickering in the sky, and powerful lights were being released continuously as rays of light flowed and circulated in the sky. Huo Yuhao arrived at his destination in 15 minutes. He carefully reached out with his spiritual detection, sweeping it towards the battlefield. The most intense parts of the battle were happening in the sky. Countless beams from soul rays and soul cannons waltzed left and right through the air, and large patches of energy storms were sweeping up into the sky. Huo Yuhao could reach out with his spiritual detection, and only observe the battle from afar. Otherwise, he ran the risk of being torn to pieces. This battle was clearly won between thousands of soul masters and soul engineers. Such a vast spectacle could be said to represent a contest between the entire continent's strongest and most top-tier forces. Huo Yuhao continued observing from the distance as he carefully approached the Mingo mountain range from one side. He could see with greater clarity if he was closer, and he had already opened his eye of destiny fully to reduce the interference brought about by the intense soul power undulations. Astonishment gradually appeared in Huo Yuhao's eyes. The Sun Moon Empire's defenses that they had deployed in the Mingo mountain range truly surprised him. Huo Yuhao could see only a little bit when he was observing the battle earlier. However, because he was observing from far away, and even when there were no soul power undulations from soul tools, he couldn't possibly see everything. In this moment, the soul tools' powers were on full display, and Huo Yuhao could see more than 3,000 assault points were firing continuously. These assault points consisted mainly of soul cannons, with soul rays supporting them. Soul rays were a lot more accurate than soul cannons, and they were easily adjusted and a lot more penetrating. However, their range couldn't compare to that of soul cannons, and both weapons had their own advantages, and were complementary to one another. Soul cannons were responsible for bombarding at a distance, while volumes of soul rays swept out horizontally at any soul masters who managed to break through within a certain area. The Sun Moon Empire had actually set up so many soul tools at the Mingo mountain range. There were probably more soul tools on the Mingo mountain range than every single soul tool within the Doluo continent's 3 empires added together. Huo Yuhao felt fortunate. If he hadn't triggered an explosion in that massive warehouse, there would probably be twice as many soul tools here today. There were so many soul tools, and naturally, there were many soul engineers controlling them. The Sun Moon Empire had absolutely made sufficient preparations. With the support of sealed milk bottles, even low-level soul engineers could unleash the power of mid-tier soul tools. They could continue operating higher-level soul tools as long as there were enough milk bottles, and their destructive and offensive capabilities were naturally exponentially boosted. The Mingo mountain range was like a giant porcupine at this moment. This porcupine continuously straightened its pricks, and didn't let anyone near. Huo Yuhao discovered at the same time that the aerial surveillance soul tools in the air had evidently been withdrawn inside an area that the Mingo mountain range's firepower could protect. These soul tools were still carrying out their reconnaissance tasks, except their areas of coverage were smaller than before. As for whether there were high-altitude aerial surveillance soul tools much higher in the sky, Huo Yuhao couldn't detect any for now. He had to concentrate and sweep region by region at such altitudes, and he currently didn't have the time for that. Protecting himself and making sure that he wasn't discovered was more important right now. The Sun Moon Empire's defenses were strict and tight, but the Star Luo Empire's battle strategies and tactics were also exceptionally appropriate. The Star Luo Empire had mobilized at least 5,000 soul masters this time, but there were less than 500 people participating in this assault. However, even the weakest of these soul masters were soul sages. 500 soul sages, what kind of frightening power was that? If this fight was 1 against 1, even if there were 3 times as many Class 7 soul engineers in a fixed area, those soul engineers would be no match for these soul sages. Most soul masters couldn't be threatened by average and typical soul tools after they became soul sages, and only soul tools that were incredibly powerful, or many soul tools trained on them at the same time, could hurt them. Furthermore, these soul masters weren't blindly committing to the assault. Instead, they attacked in probes, expending the Sun Moon Empire's inventory of milk bottles as they waited for the right opportunity to strike. This was undoubtedly the best fighting method. The soul masters ground their opponents down continuously, while they relied on their strength as soul sages to minimize their own consumption as much as possible. If this was allowed to continue, the time would come when the Sun Moon Empire's soul engineers would be whittled down to nothing. Furthermore, the Soul Masters would also launch surprise attacks on the aerial surveillance soul tools in the sky. Each one of these things destroyed would reduce the Sun Moon Empire's vision by a little bit. Huo Yuhao didn't have to guess that the White Tiger Duke and Princess Jojo had discovered from their probing attack that Dailuoli's conjecture was correct. The Sun Moon Empire hadn't sent their armies into the Star Luo Empire's borders, and had only taken the Mingo mountain range, which they had then rebuilt into a defensive front. In that case, since the Sun Moon Empire had already made their move, what was their main target? There was no question that the Sun Moon Empire was heading towards the Heavenly Soul Empire. All the Star Luo Empire could do now was work on breaking the Sun Moon Empire's lockdown on the Mingo mountain range. Afterwards, the Star Luo Empire could directly threaten the Sun Moon Empire's own territories in a bid to reduce the pressure on the Heavenly Soul Empire. The Sun Moon Empire had probably predicted this, except they probably didn't guess that the Star Luo Empire's reaction would be this quick. However, based on how strong the Sun Moon Empire's defenses looked, they had deployed at least 3 Soul Engineer legions to defend the mountain range. At the same time, they had also mobilized large amounts of low-level Soul Engineers to support those legions. They had also made use of the Mingo mountain range topography, and the Star Luo Empire faced quite a challenge if they really wanted to advance all the way through the mountain range. Huo Yuhao could tell that this battle would continue for quite some time, without a clear victor from how both forces were fighting. The Star Luo Empire's great armies were gradually bearing down on their borders, and with the White Tiger Duke's love for his soldiers, he probably wouldn't charge forward by using human wave tactics. Individual strength had become irrelevant and minute on a battlefield of such scale. The Sun Moon Empire had definitely activated every one of their surveillance soul tools, and Huo Yuhao didn't have any confidence at all in infiltrating their camp. He could only observe the front lines and see where the battle was going from afar, and pray in silence for the Star Luo Empire. The Star Luo Empire almost didn't use any soul tools at all to retaliate against the Sun Moon Empire's soul tools. A Soul Master's range was very limited most of the time, and this was true even for powerful titled Doluo. Soul Engineers had an advantage in this regard. The Star Luo Empire had to suffer, because they were not as advanced. With the Star Luo Empire's national strength, if they had focused on developing soul tools as much as possible after the Sun Moon Empire had launched their first holy war back then, the situation today wouldn't have been so bad. The Star Luo Empire's ideology that Soul Masters were invincible didn't change because of that war. Instead, the ideology was further strengthened. Hopefully, this war would allow the Star Luo Empire to wake up a little earlier. Even though it was delayed, if the Star Luo Empire could win this war, then it wouldn't be too late. After some time, the bombardment from the soul cannons and soul rays that were firing from the Mingo mountain range gradually began to weaken. Sealed milk bottles couldn't sustain them indefinitely, after all. Soul tools that were strong enough to threaten 7-ringed soul sages consumed a lot of soul power. After such a long time, the Sun Moon Empire had consumed an uncountable number of milk bottles, and their soul engineers had consumed far too much soul power. The Star Luo Empire naturally realized that the Sun Moon Empire's defenses were starting to weaken, and they began pushing forward gradually to put more pressure on their opponents. The Sun Moon Empire's soul cannons and soul ray attacks suddenly strengthened a little, and forced the Star Luo Empire's soul masters back. However, after this resurgence, they seemed to have consumed the last ounces of their strength, and their firepower weakened even further. The Star Luo Empire seemed to have gained the upper hand completely. In the end, they had thousands of soul masters who hadn't joined the battle yet. Once their top-tier soul masters achieved an unambiguous and decisive advantage, then their regular soul masters should have no problem charging down the Mingo mountain range's defensive perimeter. The mountain range's topographical advantages were nothing much to these soul masters. However, Huo Yuhao was still observing the battle from afar when he suddenly felt a little stifled. He kept having this feeling that something was wrong, and he even felt a faint ominous sensation. The Star Luo Empire's Soul Masters were pushing forward once more, while the Sun Mu Empire's resistance was conspicuously weaker this time. The Soul Masters were slowly pushing forward to the point where they could use long-range soul skills to attack the Mingo mountain range's defensive front, where the Soul Engineers were stationed. Is my premonition wrong? It seemed like the Sun Moon Empire had no strength left to continue resisting, and strong lights were starting to flicker on many of the Star Luo Empire's top-tier Soul Masters. The circles of light from Soul Rings were even more glaring in the night sky, a sign that these Soul Masters were about to unleash long-range attacks. There were so many seven-ringed Soul Sages that as long as even a third of them could unleash their offensive capabilities, it would be a great blow against the Sun Moon Empire. The Sun Moon Empire would have almost no chance to turn the tides of battle when that happened. Huo Yuhao was still thinking to himself when he suddenly grunted and plummeted from the sky. An indescribable fear coursed over his body in an instant. The spiritual detection he had released was shattered, and he felt as if the entire world was being annihilated in that moment. He hurriedly activated his soul power to control his body, but his terror made him quiver and tremble uncontrollably. What is that? He had only felt an aura as apocalyptic as this once before, when the beast god, Dai Qian, erupted in uncontrollable fury above Shrek City, as he prepared to decimate Shrek City, whatever the cost. But back then, Dai Qian's strength wasn't released in the end. This frightening aura that suddenly appeared in this moment was spreading out quickly. A ray of white light burst out from one of the Mingo mountain range's tall peaks, without any warning at all. This white pillar was as thick as a water tank, but it didn't feel or seem very powerful at all. It was ghastly white in color, and transformed into a pillar several thousand meters long as it appeared in the sky and swept outwards horizontally. What kind of light was that? Time itself seemed to freeze in the moment that this pillar appeared, and all space was sliced open wherever it crossed. However, the typical phenomenon that would happen when air was being torn apart, where immense suction forces were produced, didn't occur. It felt as though space in another world had been completely frozen and intimidated by this pillar. It was too quick, to the point where nobody had the time to react. The top-tier Soul Masters that were suppressing the Mingo mountain range were a lot more compact than before, and this white pillar swept across the people that were packed close together. Emptiness. After this white pillar swept across them, the first feeling that everyone else felt was emptiness. Just like a piece of cloth sweeping across the sky, all life was wiped out wherever it passed. There were more than 500 Soul Masters who were at least Soul Sages there. They had already unleashed their martial souls, and many of them were even preparing to unleash powerful soul skills. However, more than 200 of them were killed as this ray of white light swept past. No trace of them was left behind. Huo Yuhao opened his mouth. He hadn't expected the ominous feeling to precede such a terrifying catastrophe. What was that ray of white light that flashed before disappearing? It was extremely terrifying. It was so frightening that he was unable to react in time, even with the strength of his spiritual power. He would have ended up in the same state as those Soul Sages, if that ray of white light had swept in his direction. He wouldn't have been able to react in time, and would have been obliterated, just like that. Not only this, but the soul rays and soul cannon shells that had dimmed earlier were now unleashed with greater firepower than before. They were ferociously attacking the high-tier Soul Masters from the Star Luo Empire, who were all stunned at this moment. Instantly, the 500-man Soul Master Legion collapsed, and they all fled frantically. The sky was immediately cleared. Huo Yuhao hadn't expected this. He was only observing the situation at the Mingo mountain range. As for the Star Luo Empire, they were likely to be in an even worse situation. The Star Luo Empire had been tricked once again. The soul cannon shells and soul rays had weakened twice earlier, but it was all part of a ploy to trick the Star Luo Empire. The Star Luo Empire didn't have any experience fighting soul engineers. They didn't have any opportunity or experience in resisting a defensive front that was completely formed using soul tools. After being drawn over, more than 2/5 of the Star Luo Empire's strongest Soul Master Legion was wiped out by an attack from their opponent's Transcendent Soul Tool. This was a huge blow to the Star Luo Empire. How difficult was it to nurture a Soul Sage? In just an instant, more than 200 Soul Sages had been killed. They didn't even manage to hurt their enemies at all. This wasn't very difficult to understand, but it was very difficult to accept. Huo Yuhao opened his mouth wide, but wasn't able to say anything. An indescribable fear had risen in his heart. It wasn't his first time feeling that he was close to death, but his previous few experiences always came with a process. However, he didn't feel that there was any process when that ray of white light swept across earlier. Fortunately, that ray of white light hadn't swept in his direction. Otherwise, he would have been killed before he was able to think of anything. After a momentary daze, he started to pant heavily. He regained his thinking ability, and the fear in his eyes slowly turned into astonishment. Perhaps the soldiers of the Star Luo Empire weren't able to guess what that ray of white light was, but he could. This was because he had a teacher called Xianzuan, who was once the chief researcher of the Sun Moon Empire's illustrious Virtue Hall. Xianzuan had once told Huo Yuhao about the strongest soul engineers in the Sun Moon Empire. Among them, Huo Yuhao had faced the Star Sky Doluo Yi Yulin before. In terms of overall abilities, he was ranked third in the Sun Moon Empire. He was a powerful existence that even a transcendent Doluo might not even be able to defeat. However, there were still a few soul engineers in the Sun Moon Empire that were close to Yi Yulin. They included the Hallmaster of the illustrious Virtue Hall, Jing Hongchen. There were 2 other soul engineers ranked higher than Yi Yulin. Their abilities were unrivaled by any other Class 9 soul engineers. Even Yi Yulin was extremely respectful to both of them when he saw them, and called them seniors whenever he greeted them. Why was the Sun Moon Empire daring enough to associate themselves with the Holy Ghost Church? Xianzuan had once come up with a theory. It was because the Sun Moon Empire was very confident in their abilities. Or rather, it was because the Sun Moon Empire was very confident in their soul engineers. Those 2 soul engineers were the true stabilizing force of all the soul engineers in the Sun Moon Empire. The number 1 soul engineer was already more than 180 years old. Only the Sun Moon Empire's emperor and crown prince knew where he lived, and were qualified to see him. He was only loyal to the imperial family. He had been the hallmaster of the illustrious Virtue Hall 2 generations ago. Even Xianzuan had never seen him. However, he had heard of him before in the world of soul engineers in the Sun Moon Empire. He was recognized as the person closest to becoming a Class 10 soul engineer. In the hearts of soul engineers, a Class 10 soul engineer was almost equivalent to a god. He possessed the strongest soul tool in the Sun Moon Empire, and thus the entire Doluo continent. He spent 32 years creating that soul tool. It had enabled him to ascend to the peak of soul engineers, and made him extremely respected among them. Through this soul tool, he established himself in the supreme position in the Sun Moon Empire's world of soul engineers. As long as he was alive, he remained the chief soul engineer of the imperial court. The soul tool that he possessed was called Death God. When the Death God appeared, all light was lost. This soul tool only had one effect, which was to unleash a streak of light, the light of the Death God. Its effective range was 5,000 meters, be it in the sky or on the ground. Once the Death God appeared, there was no living creature or material that continued to exist after this light of the Death God swept past it. This was why this light of the Death God was also called the light of eternal obliteration. No one knew what the Death God looked like, and no one was aware of what the Death God Doluo, the owner of the Death God, looked like when he unleashed the power of his Death God. Some soul engineers in the Sun Moon Empire even wondered whether the Death God really existed. However, he had always been the chief soul engineer of the imperial court. Those in the Sun Moon Empire also replaced his name with Death God, and respectfully called him Lord Death God. The light of the Death God came in the form of a pale white light. Other than the light of the Death God, Huo Yuhao couldn't think of any other soul tool that could produce such great power. It wasn't just soul sages that would perish against the light of the Death God, even a titled Doluo might not be able to survive. As for transcendent and ultimate Doluo, Huo Yuhao was unsure if they could resist the light of the Death God. However, his spiritual detection was crushed by the aura released by the light of the Death God earlier, and his spiritual sea had been shaken. If not for the power of destiny protecting him, his spiritual sea would have been crushed. The light of the Death God wasn't just a simple soul power attack. It contained a very weird spiritual intent. Its strength was already far beyond what Huo Yuhao could comprehend. The feeling earlier was etched in his mind, but he didn't dare to think about how it felt. It was deservedly recognized as the number 1 soul tool on the continent. Huo Yuhao hadn't expected the Sun Moon Empire to invite the Death God Doluo out to hold the fort at the Mingo mountain range. Xianzuan only knew a little about the Death God, and no one else knew more than him. No one knew what kind of price one had to pay in the face of the death god, and no one knew how many times it could be unleashed. Even what it looked like was a mystery. However, Huo Yuhao had now personally witnessed how destructive it was. It was too frightening, it was simply beyond belief. Huo Yuhao was still shaking slightly even now. The Star Luo Empire's attacks had ceased now. The Star Luo Empire's military was already in position below, but they didn't make a move. They had no intention of advancing further. Without even asking, Huo Yuhao could guess that the Star Luo Empire must be in a state of chaos right now. More than 200 Soul Sage, or stronger Soul Masters had died. This was too huge of a blow to them. More importantly, the Star Luo Empire's attacking momentum had been stopped by the light of the Death God. No matter how strong their confidence, they couldn't possibly resist the light of the Death God. Huo Yuhao didn't have any confidence in doing so, and he didn't think the title Doluo of the Star Luo Empire had any confidence, either. The Sun Moon Empire was indeed scheming and astute. Given this strategy, they must have had thought of everything, down to the tiniest details. They weren't afraid of the Star Luo Empire seeing through their scheme. Their scheme had already been completed when the Star Luo Empire sent reinforcements. After that, it only depended on how long the Star Luo Empire would remain tricked. The Sun Moon Empire had set up their front very early on, and the fort was personally held by the #1 Soul Engineer on the continent. If the Star Luo Empire had an ultimate Doluo, they might be daring enough to continue trying. However, did they have one? They didn't. The number of ultimate Doluo on the continent could be counted on one hand. Among them, only the Dragon Emperor Doluo was a true ultimate Doluo. Dubuzi and Elder Xian were only close to becoming ultimate Doluo. After the Star Luo Empire was dealt such a huge blow, the Mingo mountain range became a territory that they couldn't cross anymore. They couldn't advance any further. What about the other side? What about the Heavenly Soul Empire? Huo Yuhao slowly shut his eyes. He seemed to see the Heavenly Soul Empire being overrun by the Sun Moon Empire. Once the Heavenly Soul Empire was destroyed, the Sun Moon Empire would attack the Star Luo Empire from two fronts, and further fulfill their goal of ruling the entire continent. The Sun Moon Empire's planning was indeed ingenious. They had fully tapped into the advantages of Soul Tools. This video will end here.